Hi, I'm Jennifer McGrail. Up next, everything you need to know about last week's government meetings on The Rundown. On Tuesday, October 11th, the Select Board welcomed members from Joint Base Cape Cod to update the larger Bourne community on what's up over at the base. Colonel Tim Gordon, Vice Wing Commander of the 102nd Intelligence Wing, discussed the National Air Guard. He gave a brief overview and mission of the Air Guard, which provides intelligence across the globe. With over 1,200 plus airmen, they are one of only 27 intelligence operations in the U.S. Air Force.
This particular mission is really centered around the concept of reach back, and it's meaning that commanders on the ground across the globe can essentially reach back and obtain critical intelligence for their area of operation.
Stepping down from a fighting base to an intelligence base means that less land is required. So of the 3,600 acres they currently occupy, the air base only needs about 400. Their plans are to divest the remaining acreage back to either the federal government or in some cases back to the Commonwealth. They could not speak to what the plans are for those particular acreage at this time, so I'm sure that is something that the Bourne Select Board will be keeping an eye on.
The 102nd has been working hard at transforming our base from a fighter industrial type of base to what we call a smaller intel campus-like base. In terms of our land, we are in the process of divesting land, right? The Air National Guard currently has a land interest of about 3,600 acres on Joint Base Cape Cod. Ideally, I know it says 650, but ideally, I think really about 400 acres would be ideal for what we need today on the Air National Guard side.
Lieutenant Colonel Stuart Smith of the Space Force 6th Space Warning Squadron discussed the mission of the Space Force, which primarily consists of tracking satellites. This station, located here on Cape Cod, is the only one on the East Coast that provides this service, with a staff of 135 people tracking roughly 30,000 objects in space.
We are, at any given second of any given day, also tracking satellites that are going overhead. So those are kind of the big missions there. That upgrade I mentioned earlier, that was to add an additional capability. That was 2 years ago. There's a lot of other radars like ours, very similar to ours, around the outer extents of the country. There's one opposite in California that I had previously worked at. There's one in North Dakota. There's one in Alaska, one in Thule, Greenland. And so this upgrade was to get just about everybody on the same baseline version. And what that did also for us was that data that we produce for missile tracking, if a missile were to come our way, or even a space launch, we track those too out of Florida and out of Virginia. That same data will be taken not only for missile warning purposes, but can also be sent to the missile defense community. All those radars, that data can go to that community for the purpose of targeting missile interceptors as well.
When the Select Board had an opportunity to ask some questions, the issue of housing was brought up. Otis is an aging base with the construction primarily consisting of 1950 and 1960s buildings. The Coast Guard maintains and upkeeps the buildings for the men and women that are housed there, which there are about 140 that live on the base. In addition to that, they provide local housing offices to service men and women to explore alternatives. This year, the housing allowance provided by the military was adjusted at a temporary short-term increase for 2022, and will have a similar calculation for the upcoming year of 2023. In some cases, this was an up to a 20% increase for housing allowance, which opens the option to families to live off base and get into the local markets, whether they're buying a home or renting in and around our area.
Just a couple of weeks ago, they announced a temporary increase for the rest of 2023, so this last quarter, a temporary increase in housing allowances. So all of a sudden, we've seen our members, their housing allowances have gone up quite a bit. Some of those military housing areas have gone up at least as much as 20%. So, some of our youngest folks, they're seeing their rates, what they're able to get. If they wanted to live off base in Bourne or elsewhere, their housing allowances are suddenly going up hundreds and hundreds of dollars, which is great for them because now they've got options. If they don't want to live on base, they have options as well to live off base, and that'll kind of give them more access to the local markets, which is the primary policy of the DoD and I believe the Coast Guard as well, is to try to tap into those markets. And so that was a very recent and welcome addition or update we got.
Cape Cod has the only air station in all of New England, all the way from the coast of New Jersey up to Canada. Captain Rob Potter, along with 176 other men and women, cover our region. They do this with only 6 aircraft in their fleet. For additional resources, they rely on volunteers, and those volunteers primarily patrol the Hudson River and look for ice, which is a huge service to the shipping industry that need to use that river to get their goods in and out of New York.
In addition to us, here's an interesting part about Air Station Cape Cod is we have got a branch of the Coast Guard called the Coast Guard Auxiliary. Now, these are, if you're not familiar, these are volunteers that help us basically with every mission, with the exception of law enforcement, that we do. Now, these are volunteers. A lot of them are retired, but basically citizens that come and help us, and they volunteer their own aircraft that will pay the gas for. The Coast Guard will pay the gas and some oil and basically a small stipend to go with that. And they will conduct a lot of the patrols that we cannot do with our small fleet of 6 aircraft. One good example is they do a lot of the patrols over the Hudson River to find out where the ice is in the wintertime, so that way we can better direct exactly where those icebreakers need to go to ensure the smooth operation of commerce.
Captain Rob Potter and his crew have received lots of international recognition, especially as they only have 6 aircraft in their fleet and rely so heavily on volunteers. They provide some very serious services as well, such as checking for drug trafficking, as well as protecting our fisheries.
In addition to that, with those waterways also are prone very much so for drug trafficking. But not only there, also we're just a couple months ago, we're involved with a fentanyl case here on the islands where we worked with several different agencies to seize thousands of pills and also thousands worth of dollars right off of one of the islands not too far from us.
Commander Patrick Sullivan of Base Cape Cod discussed the formation of this logistics branch and how they support logistics services with facilities and engineering, health and safety, housing, electronics, and even cutter boats.
Commander Patrick Sullivan, Base Cape Cod. So in 2014, prior to 2014, all of the support functions and logistics functions were rolled into Air Station Cape Cod. So in 2014, they created another 06 Captain Command, and there's Base Cape Cod. So we've got a lot of partners that we work with, the air station being one of them, Sector Southeastern New England, which has their main headquarters down the road at Woods Hole. We have an MSST, Maritime Safety and Security team that we help, a port security unit, and a fisheries training center, and there's also what we call a force comm range. It's basically a firing range that we have.
For many, Colonel Matthew Porter is a familiar face here in Bourne from Camp Edwards. He took to the podium to discuss just what is needed over at Camp Edwards, especially with so many being concerned about the proposed machine gun range. He spoke to the training that is needed, which includes maneuvering space or land, ranges for rifles, and the fact that the upwards of 3,000 soldiers come to train at a time. He did discuss some of the concerns that the residents have made over the years regarding natural resource management, cleanup program initiatives, and preservation. He discussed the Burn to Protect Habitat and Reduce Fuel Load program that they run, and of course the machine gun range did come up.
So some of our initiatives, this comes up in a lot of our meetings, everybody's heard about the machine gun range, but what else are we looking to do out in the training area? So we have a couple, like I said, rangers are our primary focus. That is a huge piece of what we do. We have to be able to train on our weapons, and we do have some active rangers out in the training area. So right now we currently have a pop-up range. We call it a Sierra range, and that's a 300-meter range for our rifles. In the future, we would like to expand that by 6 more lanes to make it a standard range. So right now it's a short range. It's only 10 lanes, and the Army generally builds them 16 lanes. So we'd like to build that a little bit wider. It's about a 6-acre project. We have the machine gun range, as you know, which is about a 100-acre project right now in the phase that we would like to actually complete in phase 1. 170 acres if it was fully completed at the 50 cal range. We also have a we recently restored 25 meter range, which we recently just completed. And then the last project that we'd like to do is just to restore a infantry squad battle course. It's a range that already exists. We don't currently use it just because it hasn't been modernized, but that'd be something that we'd like to do in the future too.
As for the machine gun range, the only updates we have at this time is that the aquifer is still being reviewed, and that by the end of the calendar year, we would expect a vote from the Environmental Management Agency as to the safety of the proposed range. The Community Advisory Council would also take a vote on this. There will be a 30-day public comment period following, and then a final draft with recommendations. Beyond Joint Base Cape Cod's updates, we heard from former Select Board member George Slade, who spoke about the RTA, Regional Transit Authority, and what's been going on with the train and commuting options and all that. And it was revisited, the idea of having a summer trolley. So that's something that the Select Board will probably put on their agenda to follow up and revisit as an option for our community.
So before the pandemic, we had talked about, you know, the village, the local trolley kind of village thing that we were going to try to do. And that, you know, didn't really happen because of the pandemic. So with all this now new construction happening in Buzzards Bay completely, that will really be something that happens, you know, in the near future.
Some clarification was given regarding Article 11, which is the ESCO long-term lease with train. Town Administrator Marlene McCullum proposes taking the town hall and library equipment requests out of the proposal to stay within the $5 million budget as presented. The reason behind this is so that we could take time to really consider more long-term plans for those two buildings, rather than installing new equipment in there, which I believe consisted of a boiler for an aging building that maybe the community decides to go in a different direction. So she felt this was one way of staying within the proposed lease of $5 million and not having to make too many adjustments. She had some plans. She presented two options about how to possibly stay within the $5 million budget and get a good lease loan rate.
Now, I'm going to give you two different scenarios here, so just bear with me for a minute. One option is to finance $4,951,737. So that would be, in this scenario that I'm talking about right now, that would be your lease payment. Now, what this does is it includes the cost of all of the work that we anticipate you'll be getting rebates from at the end of the project. Now, this is important because right now, the tax-exempt lease instrument is structured so that we cannot prepay towards it without a penalty. So one of the things that I want to do with Bank of America is negotiate a one-time prepayment towards your principal without any penalties. And I want you to have that ability because we know that you're going to be getting significant amounts of rebates. You're going to be getting they're estimating $392,000. So you'll see in the purple line, the rebates. So they're estimating just under $400,000 in rebates. That'll come really when the project is done and in and complete, and the utility company rebates some of this equipment. Now, if I'm not successful in negotiating and we're only entering into the lease for the 4.559, how do we make up the difference? How do we close that gap for that utility rebates? What I would recommend is that for that time period, for that gap, we talk about closing that gap using ARPA funds. And then when the rebates are realized, those rebates then, go back to be used as if we would use the ARPA funds.
And on Thursday evening, the planning board met and addressed some concerns they had for special permit for 6 Forest Park Drive.
I would just say that this project is located in the Water Resources District, and we are requesting a special permit from the board due to the removal of more than 70% of the existing natural cover on the site. We're at 71.5%, which is just over, but really was what was required for clearing around the building and the additional grading needed.
The primary concerns the committee raised had to do with the lot size and the size of the proposed building, and it was suggested to reduce the building size. About the bioretention and the flooding that would happen potentially at the site, so re-looking at the rain garden and the catch basins and planting and revegetation. The way the project would connect to other roads in the area, acceleration and de-acceleration from MacArthur Boulevard, as well as connecting to Jonathan Bourne Drive in the future as a possibility. So there was a lot of discussion, and 6 Forest Park Drive will definitely be back before the planning board before moving forward. That's all I have for you this week. I'll look forward to seeing you again next week on The Rundown.